The OR was cold, the way it always is, and the surgeon's hands were steady right up until they weren't. That's the part nobody talks about afterward. Not the blood, not the monitors screaming, not the fact that a 31-year-old woman who wasn't supposed to be in that room ended up being the only reason a 62-year-old grandfather made it off that table. They talk about the miracle. They talk about God's hand. They don't talk about the woman who was his instrument, who had every reason to walk out that door and chose, instead, to stay. Her name was Amaya O.C. Thornton. But in the Army, they just called her Sergeant Thornton. And in the years since her discharge, she'd gotten pretty good at being nobody in particular. She had come to Mercy General the same way most people come to hospitals they don't want to be in, because someone else needed her there. Her younger brother, Kwame, had been admitted 3 days earlier with a bowel obstruction. Nothing immediately life-threatening, the doctors said, as if that phrase was supposed to make her feel better. She had driven 11 hours from Fort Worth to Chicago without stopping except for gas and a coffee that tasted like hot cardboard. And she'd been sleeping in the family waiting room on the 3rd floor, in 30-minute intervals ever since. She wasn't supposed to be on the 5th floor at all, but Amaya had always been the kind of person who couldn't sit still when she was scared, and sitting still in that waiting room felt like something close to dying. So she walked, the way she used to walk the perimeter of the FOB at night when she couldn't sleep in Kandahar, just moving, just keeping her legs, just reminding her body that it was still alive and operational and hadn't failed her yet. She found the vending machine on the 5th floor the way you find things in hospitals at 2 in the morning, by accident, following the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of burned coffee down a corridor she wasn't paying attention to. And that's when she heard it. Not a scream. Something worse. The sound of controlled panic. Voices dropping low and moving fast. The specific kind of urgency that happens when professionals are trying not to alarm the wrong people. She knew that sound. She'd made that sound herself in a dusty village in Helmand Province when the medic 2 feet away from her had taken a round to the shoulder, and she'd had exactly 12 seconds to figure out what to do next. Her feet moved before her brain caught up. The door to OR 5 was swinging closed when she pushed it open. Inside, the scene arranged itself in front of her the way crisis always does. Too many things happening at once, none of them good. Dr. Harrison Price, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, 64 years old, the man whose photograph was on the wall downstairs in the lobby, next to words like distinguished and pioneering, was on the floor. Not the floor. A nurse, a young one with red-rimmed eyes, had caught him on the way down and lowered him as carefully as you can lower a 200-pound man when you're not expecting to have to do it. He was breathing. That was something. His face was gray in the way that faces get gray when the heart is having a conversation with the rest of the body that the rest of the body doesn't want to hear. On the table in the center of the room, chest open, heart exposed under bright surgical lights, was a man named Walter Gibbs, 62 years old, father of 4, grandfather of 7. He'd come in that morning for a triple bypass that was supposed to take 3 hours and had been described by the intake nurse as very standard, as these things go. He was 40 minutes into it. The chest retractor was in place. The bypass machine was running. The perfusionist, a quiet man in his 40s named Doyle, was managing the machine with the focused calm of someone who understood that his job right now was to keep being calm. But Doyle couldn't operate. That wasn't his role. And the second surgeon, Dr. Reeves, was scrubbed out in the hallway having what appeared to be an acute asthma attack, triggered by a latex allergy that should have been caught in pre-op screening and wasn't. There was an open chest on the table. There were no surgeons in the room. A scrub tech named Vivian, early 30s, hair tucked under her cap, hands still holding a retractor with the automatic grip of someone who's been trained not to let go, looked up at the door when Amaya pushed through it and said, very quietly, "You need to leave." This is a sterile environment. Amaya didn't leave. What happened? She said. It wasn't a question. Sir went down, Vivian said. Cardiac event, we think. The other attending is compromised. I've called for backup. Someone is coming from the 6th floor, but how long? Vivian's jaw tightened. 8 to 12 minutes. Minimum. Amaya looked at the man on the table, at the monitor above him. She wasn't a surgeon. She needed to be clear about that, to herself, to the room, to whatever version of God was paying attention tonight. She was not a surgeon. She had never been a surgeon. She had been a Special Forces medic for 9 years, which meant she had kept people alive in conditions that would make most OR nurses lose sleep for a decade. But keeping someone alive and operating on someone were not the same thing. She knew that. She also knew what 8 to 12 minutes looked like on a bypass machine. And she knew what the alternative was. Talk me through where he is, she said, moving to the sink. Vivian stared at her. Ma'am, you've been in this room for 40 minutes. You know this procedure. Talk me through where he is. There was a pause. The kind of pause that happens when a person is deciding whether the rules still apply to the situation they're currently in. Vivian talked her through it. What happened in OR 5 between 2:17 and 2:31 a.m. on a Tuesday in March is not something Amaya likes to describe in detail, and I'm going to respect that. What I can tell you is what the records show and what the people in that room said afterward. Doyle said she moved with a kind of economy he'd never seen outside of experienced attendings. No wasted motion, no second guessing. Hands that had stitched wounds in a forward operating base by flashlight, that had kept pressure on bleeders in helicopters, that had worked in conditions where clean was a relative term and sterile was something you aimed for and hoped. Those hands found a steadiness in that OR that the room and the man on the table needed. She didn't try to complete the bypass. She was clear about that too, even in the moment. That wasn't her role, and she knew it. What she did was maintain, hold the territory, keep Walter Gibbs's heart doing what it needed to do while the cavalry was on its way. Vivian, who could have frozen, didn't freeze. She talked, she guided. She handed instruments with the calm efficiency of someone who'd spent years building the muscle memory for exactly this, and who understood that the best thing she could do for the man on the table was be the most useful version of herself right now. The attending from the 6th floor arrived at 2:29 a.m. His name was Dr. Kwame Asante, which Amaya noted with a private, tired kind of humor that she didn't share with anyone until much later. He assessed the situation in approximately 4 seconds, asked 2 questions, and took over at 2:31. Walter Gibbs's surgery was completed successfully at 4:47 a.m. He was moved to the cardiac ICU at 5:15. He was awake and asking for his wife by 7:30. Amaya was in the family waiting room on the 3rd floor when the sun came up. She'd changed back into the clothes she'd been wearing, jeans and a worn army hoodie with the logo mostly cracked off, and she was drinking the worst coffee the hospital cafeteria had to offer and watching the sky go orange over the Chicago skyline through a window that hadn't been cleaned since probably October. A nurse came to find her at 8:04, not about Kwame, about Walter. His daughter, a woman named Paulette Gibbs-Osei, mid-40s, still in yesterday's mascara, the particular exhausted beauty of someone who'd been crying and praying in alternating intervals all night, had asked to speak to the person who had been in OR 5. Amaya went. She sat across from Paulette in a small conference room they use for exactly these kinds of conversations, the ones that go either direction. Paulette had been told a version of events by Dr. Asante, careful and professional and appropriately hedged with phrases like an individual assisted the team, and the situation was managed with remarkable efficiency. Which was accurate, and also maybe the most insufficient sentence Amaya had ever had applied to her. Paulette looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "My father has 7 grandchildren. The youngest is 4 months old. He hasn't even held her yet because she was born early, and there were complications." Amaya didn't say anything. He's going to hold her, Paulette said, because of you. Amaya looked at the table, at her hands, the hands that had spent 9 years being pointed at everything that needed fixing in conditions that didn't allow for fixing, and had somehow, in a moment she hadn't planned and couldn't have prepared for, done the one thing that needed doing. "I'm not a surgeon," she said. It was the truest thing she could think of to say. "No," Paulette said. "You're something else." Here's what you need to understand about Amaya Osei Thornton before this story makes the kind of sense it's supposed to make. She grew up in Decatur, Georgia. Her mother, Roberta, worked nights at a distribution center and days at a salon, and somehow found time in between to raise 2 children, keep the lights on, and maintain a faith in God that Amaya had always admired and only partially shared. Her father left when Amaya was 9 and Kwame was 4, and the space he left behind was the kind that doesn't close. It just becomes familiar, like a scar you stop noticing. She wasn't supposed to go into the military. She was supposed to go to nursing school. That had been the plan. Community college, nursing program, the county hospital, stability. Her aunt had been a nurse for 30 years. Her mother thought it was the right kind of job for the right kind of woman. And Amaya had thought so too, right up until the day a recruiter sat across from her in the guidance counselor's office at 18 and told her about the 68W program, the combat medic specialty. And something inside her that she hadn't known was waiting for a direction clicked into place like a key in a lock. She scored in the 94th percentile on the ASVAB. They put her through the pipeline fast. She spent 9 years doing things she can't talk about in places she's not supposed to name. She came back with a body that worked, and a mind that needed some maintenance, and a set of skills that didn't come with an obvious civilian application. The VA counselor had given her a pamphlet about transition assistance. She'd thrown it away somewhere in Texas. She'd been doing private security consulting for 2 years when Kwame called her from a hospital waiting room in Chicago, and she'd heard the fear in his voice and started driving. That's the thing about people like Amaya. They don't go looking for the moments. The moments go looking for them. Dr. Harrison Price survived his cardiac event. He'd need a stent and about 6 weeks of recovery, but he was going to make it. Amaya found this out the same morning, from the same nurse, in the same hallway. She felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She didn't know Harrison Price. She'd never met him before he was on the floor of his own operating room. But she'd spent 40 minutes inside his work. And there's something about that, about being that close to what someone else has built their life around, that creates a strange kind of intimacy. She hoped he got better. She hoped he went back to the OR and did 100 more surgeries and had a long and uneventful retirement and never knew her name. She went back to the waiting room and fell asleep in the chair by the window and didn't wake up until Kwame texted her from 2 floors below to say they were taking him for another scan, and she should eat something. She ate a granola bar from the vending machine. It tasted like cardboard and chocolate, and she ate it in 4 bites. There is a version of this story where everything works out neatly, where someone files the right report and the right people read it, and Amaya gets a commendation or a ceremony, or at minimum a formal thank you from the hospital administration, where the moment she found herself in is properly cataloged and understood and placed in its correct historical context. That's not the version that happened. What happened was quieter, and also, in the ways that matter, more complete. 3 weeks after that night, Amaya got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up. She'd been doing that more lately, letting things go to voicemail, giving herself a minute before deciding whether to engage. A therapist she'd started seeing the year before had told her that was actually healthy. She was still trying to believe it. She picked up. It was Walter Gibbs. His voice was the voice of a man who had been very sick and was getting better and knew the difference between those 2 things in a way that changes how you use words. Low, careful. like each sentence was something he'd thought about before he said it. He told her his daughter had tracked down her number through the hospital. He told her he hoped that was okay. He told her he was calling because there were some things he wanted to say, and he'd learned in the last 3 weeks not to wait on saying things he needed to say. He said thank you. He said it more than once. Then he said something else. He said, "My wife's name is Roberta. I've been married to her for 38 years. She prayed all night in the waiting room, and she told me God sent someone. I wanted to call and tell you that she believes that, and that I believe it too. I don't know what you believe, but I thought you should know." Amaya stood in her kitchen in Fort Worth with the phone against her ear and looked out the window at the backyard that needed mowing and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "My mother's name is Roberta." She didn't explain why she said it. She didn't know why she said it. It just felt like the truest thing available to her in that moment, the way true things sometimes surface without permission. Walter laughed. It was the laugh of a man who'd been given more time and was not going to waste it. "Well," he said, "isn't that something?" Quame went home 12 days after that. The obstruction resolved with treatment. No surgery required. Amaya drove him home herself, loaded him into her car with his hospital bag and the pillow their mother had sent from Decatur, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, and drove him back to his apartment in Evanston and made sure he ate something before she left. He asked her, on the drive, what had happened on the 5th floor. He'd heard something from a nurse, or maybe from the aide, or maybe just from the particular way hospital information moves through a place like water through walls, which is to say everywhere, and with no regard for who's supposed to know what. She told him, not everything, the broad shape of it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom's going to lose her mind." Amaya laughed. It came out of her before she could decide whether she wanted it to. Real laughter, the kind that surprises you. "She's not going to find out," Amaya said. "She's absolutely going to find out," Quime said. "She always does." He was right. Roberta Thornton found out 6 weeks later, through a chain of communication that involved Paulette Gibbs Osei posting something on Facebook and a cousin in Atlanta seeing it and sending it to Roberta with a message that said, "Isn't this your Amaya?" and Roberta calling Amaya at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning and crying for 20 minutes before she said a single word. The first word she said was baby. The second word she said was God. The third thing she said was, I always knew he put something in you for a reason. Did you know? Did you know he was going to use you like that?" Amaya was sitting on the edge of her bed in Fort Worth. The sun wasn't fully up. The room was that particular shade of early gray that makes everything look provisional, still in the process of becoming whatever it was going to be that day. "No, Mama," she said. "I didn't know." She paused. "I just stayed." That's the part of this story that keeps finding me every time I think about it. Not the technical piece, though that matters, and the people in OR 5 that night deserve to have it acknowledged that what they did was extraordinary and professional, and the result of years of preparation meeting one night of impossible circumstance. Not the outcomes, though Walter Gibbs is alive and Kwame Thornton is fine, and Harrison Price spent 6 weeks recovering and then went back to his OR and has operated every week since. It's those 2 words, I just stayed. Because here's the thing about the people who save us. The people who are there when the monitors start screaming and the plan falls apart and everyone is looking around the room for someone who knows what to do. They are not in that moment thinking about being heroes. They are not calculating the odds or considering the optics or waiting to see if someone more qualified shows up. They just stay. They bring everything they have to the room they're already in, and they use it, and they don't leave. Amaya Osei Thornton was not supposed to be on the 5th floor. She was not supposed to be anywhere near OR 5. She was a 31-year-old woman in a cracked army hoodie who drove 11 hours because her brother needed her and ended up in the only place on Earth she was equipped to be, at the only moment that place needed her, in the way that only she could be there. Some people call that coincidence. Roberta Thornton does not call it coincidence. And honestly, neither do I. Walter Gibbs held his 4-month-old granddaughter for the first time on a Thursday afternoon in April, 6 weeks after a surgery that should have been straightforward and wasn't, in a hospital room filled with people he loved, and one of those terrible mylar balloons that says "Get well soon" in letters that are somehow both cheerful and slightly threatening. He didn't know Amaya was thinking about him that day. She didn't know he was thinking about her. But she was. And he was. And somewhere between Fort Worth and Chicago, whatever thread connects one life to another was still there, still holding, the way it holds for people who've been through something together, even if they never expected to, and probably never will be again. On her kitchen windowsill in Fort Worth, Amaya keeps a single photograph. It's not of herself. It's not of her family. It's a photograph her brother took years ago, before everything. When they were kids in Decatur and their mother was working nights, and the two of them would sit on the back porch in the summer and watch the fireflies come up out of the grass like the ground itself was thinking about becoming something luminous. She doesn't know exactly why she keeps it there. She's not sure she needs to know. She just keeps it. And every morning, when the light comes through that window, it lands on the photograph first.